The words hung in the air like a bridge between two worlds, carrying all the weight of hope, fear, and desperate longing for acceptance. 14-year-old Omar Ahmad stood at the Family Feud podium, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find the courage to complete his sentence. "We are from," he began, then stopped, his perfect English suddenly feeling inadequate to capture the complexity of his family's journey. Behind him, his father Rashid shifted uncomfortably, his weathered hands clasped tightly together. At 45, Rashid Ahmad carried himself with the careful dignity of a man who had once been important in his homeland, but now struggled daily with the humiliation of being unable to communicate in the language of his new country. Beside him stood his wife, Fatima, whose kind eyes reflected years of watching her brilliant son translate the world for parents who felt lost in translation. Steve Harvey sensed the tension immediately. In his decades of hosting, he had developed an instinct for recognizing when contestants were wrestling with something deeper than stage nerves. The pause stretched uncomfortably long, and Steve could see Omar's internal struggle playing out across his young face. The battle between shame about his family's limitations and pride in their survival. "Take your time, son," Steve said gently, setting down his cards and moving closer to the family. "Where are you folks from?" Rashid stepped forward slightly, his English heavily accented, but determined. "We's from Syria," he said, his voice carrying both pride and apology. "We sorry for bad English. We try very hard to learn, but is difficult for old people like us." The studio audience, which had been buzzing with typical game show energy, fell quiet as the weight of that simple statement settled over them. Syria. 4 years after the height of the refugee crisis, the word still carried images of bombed cities, desperate families, and children whose childhoods had been stolen by war. Steve's expression shifted from entertainer to human being. "Sir, you don't need to apologize for anything. Not here, not to me, not to anyone. The fact that you're standing on this stage, speaking a language that wasn't yours to begin with, tells me everything I need to know about your strength and your family's courage. But to understand the full impact of that moment, let me take you back to how the Ahmad family arrived at this point." 4 years earlier, Rashid Ahmad had been a high school mathematics teacher in Aleppo, Syria. He lived in a modest but comfortable apartment with Fatima, who worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and their 10-year-old son Omar, who was already showing exceptional academic promise. Their life wasn't perfect. No life in war-torn Syria could be, but they had community, purpose, and hope for Omar's future. The bombing that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in March 2019. Rashid had been walking Omar to school when the air raid sirens began wailing. They had heard these warnings hundreds of times before, but this time was different. The explosion that followed was so close that the concussion knocked them both to the ground. When Rashid pulled his son from the rubble of what had been a grocery store just minutes before, he made a decision that would define the rest of their lives. "We have to leave," he told Fatima. That night, as they huddled in their apartment, listening to distant explosions, "This is no place for our son to grow up." The journey that followed was the kind of harrowing experience that refugees around the world know too well, but that most Americans can barely imagine. 3 weeks in overcrowded detention centers in Turkey, a terrifying boat ride across the Mediterranean that left Omar seasick and traumatized, months in Greek refugee camps, where dignity was a luxury they couldn't afford, then the waiting endless, soul-crushing waiting, while bureaucrats in distant offices decided whether their story of survival was compelling enough to earn them a chance at a new life. When the call finally came, that they had been approved for resettlement in America, Fatima had cried for 3 days straight. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief, mixed with terror about starting over in a country where they didn't speak the language, understand the culture, or have any support system. They had arrived in Richmond, Virginia, on a cold December morning in 2020, carrying everything they owned in 2 small suitcases and holding a folder of documents that represented their entire legal existence in America. The Refugee Resettlement Agency had provided them with a small apartment, some basic furniture, and a caseworker who explained the bewildering array of services, requirements, and opportunities that awaited them. For Rashid, the transition had been particularly brutal. In Syria, he had been respected, articulate, and capable. In America, he struggled to order food at McDonald's. His engineering degree meant nothing without American certification. His fluent Arabic, his deep knowledge of mathematics and literature, his years of experience inspiring young minds. None of it mattered in a country where being unable to pronounce refrigerator correctly made people assume you were stupid. Fatima had found work cleaning office buildings, night shift work that paid minimum wage but allowed her to avoid too much interaction with English speakers during the day. Rashid had taken a job in a warehouse, loading trucks and moving boxes, work that required his back, but not his mind. They had gone from being professionals contributing to their community to being invisible laborers grateful for any opportunity to survive. But it was Omar who had borne the heaviest burden. At 10 years old, he had become the family's translator, navigator, and cultural interpreter. He learned English with the rapid adaptability that only children possess. But the responsibility of being his parents' voice in the world had aged him beyond his years. He attended parent-teacher conferences with his mother and father, translating not just words, but contexts, cultural nuances, and expectations that his parents couldn't grasp. Omar had watched his father, once a confident educator who had commanded respect in his classroom, shrink into himself as he struggled with simple transactions at grocery stores. He had seen his mother, who had saved lives as a nurse, reduced to tears of frustration when she couldn't understand instructions from their landlord. And he had learned to carry the weight of being the bridge between his family's past dignity and their present struggles. The Family Feud opportunity had come through Omar's high school. The show was featuring new American families during their annual Diversity Week, celebrating immigrants and refugees who were building new lives in America. Omar's English teacher, Miss Patterson, had suggested that the Ahmad family apply, thinking it might be a fun opportunity for them to be celebrated rather than merely tolerated. The application process had been complicated by the family's language barriers and their unfamiliarity with American television culture. Omar had filled out most of the paperwork himself, carefully crafting responses that presented his family in the most positive light, while honestly acknowledging their journey from Syria. When they were selected, Fatima had worried that they would embarrass themselves on national television. Rashid had been concerned that their story wasn't remarkable enough for American audiences, but Omar had insisted they participate. "This is our chance to show America who we really are," he had told his parents. "Not just refugees who need help, but people who have something to offer." During the drive from Richmond to the Atlanta studios, Omar had coached his parents on potential questions and answers, helping them practice responses that would sound natural on television. But despite all their preparation, the moment they stepped onto the bright stage with cameras rolling and an audience of 300 people watching, the weight of representing all Syrian refugees, all Muslim families, all immigrants to America, had felt overwhelming. The introductions had gone relatively smoothly. Steve had been warm and welcoming, making gentle jokes that put them at ease without making them feel like the punchline. Omar had translated Steve's questions for his parents when needed, and they had managed to convey their gratitude for being in America without sounding rehearsed or overly political. "So the Ahmad family," Steve had said during the family introductions, "you came here from Syria 4 years ago. Tell me, what's been the best part about being in America?" Rashid had looked to Omar to translate, and Omar had repeated the question in Arabic. Rashid's response had been immediate and heartfelt, and Omar had translated, "My father says the best part is that his son can go to school without worrying about bombs, that we can sleep at night without fear, that America gave us safety when nowhere else would." The audience had responded with warm applause, and Steve had nodded with genuine respect. "That's what America is supposed to be about," he had said, "giving people a place where they can build a better life." The game had progressed normally through the first 2 rounds. The Ahmad family was playing against the Rodriguez family from California, and both teams were enjoying the typical Family Feud experience. Omar had buzzed in several times with quick, accurate answers that earned points and praise from Steve. His parents had participated when they could, and Omar had translated questions and celebrated their contributions. But it was during the 3rd round that the moment arrived that would change everything. Steve had just announced the survey question, "Name something that makes someone a true American." It was the kind of question that could be answered in dozens of ways. Patriotism, freedom, apple pie, baseball. But for the Ahmad family, standing on that stage in front of millions of viewers, the question carried different weight. It wasn't just about winning points on a game show. It was about belonging, acceptance, and identity. In a country where their place was still being debated in political arenas and social media comments, Omar stepped forward to answer for his family. But for the first time all day, his confident English deserted him. The question touched something too deep, too personal for simple game show responses. A true American is, Omar began, then stopped, his voice catching slightly. He looked at his parents, then at Steve, then at the cameras that were broadcasting this moment to millions of homes across the country. Steve sensed the profound nature of this moment immediately. He had hosted enough shows to recognize when entertainment was about to become something more meaningful. "Take your time, son," Steve said gently, setting down his index cards and moving closer to the family. "What makes someone a true American? What does that mean to you and your family?" Omar looked at his parents one more time, and something shifted in his expression. The careful diplomatic answers he had been rehearsing fell away, and he spoke from his heart. "A true American," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word, "is someone who believes that this country is big enough for everyone's dreams. Someone who understands that being American isn't about where you were born or what language you spoke first. It's about believing that tomorrow can be better than today, if we work together." The audience was completely silent, captivated by the wisdom coming from this 14-year-old who had lived experiences most adults couldn't imagine. But Omar wasn't finished. 4 years of translation, adaptation, and carrying his family's hopes had led to this moment of truth. "My parents were teachers and nurses in Syria. They saved lives and educated children. The bombs took away their country, but they didn't take away their hearts. We came here with nothing except hope, that America would see us not as a burden, but as a family that wants to contribute, to belong, to be part of something bigger than ourselves." Tears were starting to form in Omar's eyes, but his voice remained steady. "A true American is someone who makes room for people like us, someone who understands that when you help a refugee family, you're not just changing their lives, you're proving that America still believes in its own promises." Steve Harvey, who had thought he'd heard every kind of answer during his hosting career, found himself moved beyond words. He looked at Rashid and Fatima, who were crying as they watched their son speak truths they had carried in their hearts, but never found words to express in English. Without consulting producers, without checking protocol, Steve made a decision that would define this moment forever. "Stop the game," he announced to the studio. "Stop everything. We need to talk about what just happened here." He walked over to the Ahmad family, his usual game show demeanor replaced by something deeper and more authentic. "Omar," Steve said, "in 30 years of doing television, I have never heard anyone explain what it means to be American better than you just did. And Mr. and Mrs. Ahmad," he continued, looking directly at Rashid and Fatima, "I want you to know something. You don't need to apologize for your English. You don't need to apologize for being here. You are exactly what America needs more of. People who believe in hard work, who love their families, and who understand that this country is strongest when everyone gets a chance to contribute their gifts." Steve turned to address the audience and cameras directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are looking at what American dreams actually look like. Not the Hollywood version, not the political talking points version, but the real version. A family that lost everything and still believes in hope. A son who carries 2 cultures in his heart and makes both of them stronger. Parents who work jobs that don't use their education because they're willing to do whatever it takes to give their child a better future." He walked back to Omar and placed both hands on the teenager's shoulders. "You asked what makes someone a true American. Son, you and your family are true Americans. You just proved it." Then Steve did something that would become one of the most iconic moments in Family Feud history. He removed his suit jacket, his lucky jacket that he wore to every taping, and placed it around Omar's shoulders. "This jacket has been with me for every show I've hosted," Steve said. "But today, it belongs with someone who just reminded all of America what we're supposed to be about. You keep this, and every time someone makes you feel like you don't belong here, You remember this moment. You remember that you are home. Omar looked down at the jacket, then up at Steve, then at his parents who were crying with joy and pride. When he spoke, his voice carried all the emotion of a family's 4-year journey from displacement to belonging. "Mr. Steve," Omar said, "can I say one more thing?" "Son, you can say whatever you want." Omar looked directly into the main camera, addressing millions of viewers across America. "To every refugee family watching this, to every immigrant child who feels caught between two worlds, to every parent who feels ashamed because they can't help their children with homework in English, you belong here too. America is not just for people who were born here, it's for people who choose to be here, who fight to be here, who believe in here." Then, in a moment that would be replayed millions of times on social media, Omar turned to his parents and said something in Arabic that made them both laugh and cry simultaneously. Steve looked confused. So, Omar translated, "I told them, we are not Syrian Americans or Arab Americans. We are Americans, period." Rashid stepped forward then, his accented English suddenly sounding not like something to apologize for, but like something to celebrate, evidence of a journey, proof of adaptation, a bridge between worlds. "Mr. Steve," Rashid said, his voice thick with emotion, 4 years ago, we lose everything. We think we have no home. But today, you show us we do have home. America is our home. We are American family." The studio audience erupted in applause that went on for several minutes. The Rodriguez family left their podium to embrace the Ahmed family. Audience members were standing, many openly crying, as they witnessed this family's transformation from refugee status to unquestioned belonging. What happened after the camera stopped rolling became the subject of news articles, social media campaigns, and policy discussions for months. Steve Harvey personally connected the Ahmad family with educational opportunities, helping Rashid get his teaching credentials recognized in Virginia and assisting Fatima in finding nursing positions that utilized her medical training. The episode, when it aired 6 weeks later, became one of the most watched and shared in Family Feud history. But more importantly, it sparked conversations in homes, schools, and communities across America about immigration, belonging, and what it truly means to be American. The segment was translated into 17 languages and shown in refugee camps around the world, offering hope to families still waiting for their chance at resettlement. Immigration attorneys reported increased interest from volunteers wanting to help refugee families navigate the complex process of building new lives in America. Omar kept Steve's jacket through high school and is now wearing it at his graduation ceremony from Georgetown University, where he's studying international relations with plans to work in refugee advocacy. His parents both found positions that utilize their professional skills. Rashid as a high school math teacher specializing in working with immigrant students, and Fatima as a nurse in a clinic that serves refugee communities. Every year, on the anniversary of their Family Feud appearance, the Ahmad family sends Steve Harvey a card with photos of their continued life in America. Omar's achievements in school, Rashid's success with his students, Fatima's work helping other refugee families navigate the healthcare system. The cards always end the same way: still proud to be American, still grateful you helped us feel at home. The lesson that 14-year-old Omar taught that day extends far beyond immigration policy or refugee advocacy. He reminded America that belonging isn't determined by birthplace or native language. It's determined by commitment, contribution, and belief in shared values. He showed that sometimes the people who most appreciate American ideals are those who had to fight hardest to reach them. Steve Harvey learned that day that the most powerful moments in television aren't scripted. They're discovered when you create space for people to share their authentic truths. Sometimes a game show host can do more than entertain. Sometimes he can help a family transition from feeling grateful to be tolerated to knowing they're celebrated as part of the American story. Rashid and Fatima often say that they came to America seeking safety, but found something much more valuable: the chance to belong completely, to contribute meaningfully, and to watch their son grow into someone who bridges cultures while being fully confident in his American identity. Because that's what real American dreams look like. That's what immigration success sounds like. And that's what happens when a family's courage to start over meets a community's willingness to make room, proving that America is strongest not when it builds walls, but when it opens doors to people brave enough to believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. The microphone may have fallen silent that day, but Omar's voice continues to echo in policy discussions, community centers, and refugee support organizations across the country, reminding everyone that American identity isn't inherited, it's chosen, earned, and shared by anyone willing to believe in the promise that this country can be home to anyone willing to help build it.